And I'm very excited to have you both here. And somehow the seminar and the whole inclusion workshop, which started a month ago, is coming to an end. Although inclusion as such is not coming to an end, but I really like to open the discussion and having a post-colonial perspective on projects with people with disabilities and bring this whole discussion on another level or just having another perspective on it. This panel discussion is going to be with Boaz Murema, who is from the Bantu e.V., sitting in Berlin right now, and Schwake, who is with us from Germany, Augsburg. I think you all know his familiar face right now, as we just had the workshop with him. So he's a medical doctor, specialized in orthopedics and rehabilitation. He lived and worked in Tanzania for 4 years between 2015 and 2019 in Iringa, and is now back in Germany, but still closely connected with the NEMA project. And Hans, since you have been with us for the different seminars, you also supported at organizing them, and you have the first-hand information and experiences working in projects with people with disabilities in Germany, but also in Tanzania. I would like to start coming back to the whole topic of inclusion. What means inclusion for you? Can you briefly explain?
Inclusion is a vision. So it is a vision so that people with disabilities should have a life like others. In fact, this is not possible. We have to look not on the disabilities, but on the persons. And this is what I would like to give as a definition. So to see the person and not the disability.
Okay, Boaz, this was a brief answer. Let us try to continue like this. Boaz, you live currently in Berlin, but your original come from Uganda. You're 31 years old and define yourself as a Pan-Africanist. You're part of the political Green Party in Berlin and also critical political educator in topics like anti-Black racism, albinism, and a scholar of the post-colonialism with focus on historical international relations. You yourself are also living with a disability, or as you told me before, you prefer saying person with impairments instead of mention with mit Behinderung, people with disabilities. Can you briefly explain why you prefer this wording and what inclusion means for you?
Thank you, Helena, and thank you, Hans, for your answer. Yes, I am a post-polio syndrome patient or person. And
ja, ich lebe mit einer Einschränkung, mit einem Syndrom.
And for me, a disability, using the word disabled is difficult for me. If I break this cup, it will crash. So it will not be used at all anymore. So then it will have been disabled. So completely useless. And this is why I try to focus on what actually is happening with me. Am I disabled or am I just impaired in one way or another? So that's why the German wording of Beeinträchtigung is something that I can also work with better than Behinderung. And inclusion for me is something that is possible, although it is also requiring a long-term process, not just for people with disabilities to include themselves, but also the mainstream society to open themselves to building an inclusive society. And this is what I work with when I'm doing ableism or ableismus workshops and seminars.
Now you already mentioned the word inclusion. Can you continue telling me what is inclusion meaning for you? How would it look like? What is an inclusive society?
For me, an inclusive society is a place where every person, like you just said, Hans, every person is allowed to fully participate in the society, in the communities where they are, with regard to their capacities and their abilities that they can bring. Every human being is a resource for the society, but also for this human being to be a resource to the society is that you first have to look at which abilities do they have, what can they bring on the table to the society, than looking at what do I want them to bring on the table. And if they can't bring that I expect of them, then they're actually not going to be a good player in the society. And that's why when the society expects me to be a sports, an athlete, and I can't be an athlete because I am physically limited to work, then they will not see me as useful to the society as I actually am in practice. And so this is why we don't see and observe societies being as inclusive as they should be, whether here in the north or in the south. So yeah, this is what I understand as an inclusive society.
Thank you, Boaz. You mentioned here in the north or in the south. This also leads to post-colonial perspectives. And you already mentioned you're also a scholar within the field of post-colonialism. How would you bring post-colonialism and talking about inclusion together?
That is a very interesting topic, because one, we would like to look at the time of slavery or during slave trade, and why I ask myself all the time, why is it that Africa is still, since then, suffering from the fact that the human resource in those times when the continent could have been, gradually developed, was stolen away? And they didn't just take everyone they found. They looked at, are you disabled or you're not? Are you strong or you're not? So that is, for me, from a colonial and slavery perspective, I want to go back to that history and pay attention to the fact that only people who were strong, who could work on the farms, who could survive the storms on the seas, on the ocean, crossing over, could be taken away. Gladly, the people with disabilities were not, but also it communicates the question of value. Which value are you placing on the people? And that's why when you see that the continent was colonized, they also brought this aspect of who is valuable, who can contribute to the society and who cannot. And this is why also in many African societies, this was highly picked or highly copied. And that's why you don't see also in many employment fields, people with disabilities are given chances, because during those structures that were built by colonialists, they didn't see people with disabilities as important to their colonial work, which they would be taking back to their colonial countries, the colonizer countries rather, and so that made them to exclude them. And that's why I find it very interesting that we see how homes of people with disabilities, or even Sonderschulen or special needs schools, this is also not something that came out of the blue. This is something that we see, while we call it a perfect strategy to include and offer services to people with disabilities, but it is also a very interesting style and strategy to exclude them. So this is something that we can discuss the whole day, but this is how I look at this topic in a short way.
Thank you very much. Boaz, you started with the colonial time, with slavery, dependencies which developed. And Hans, this reminded me of something you mentioned during our pre-talk when we prepared this discussion, that you see, or some people argue, that people with disabilities need an assistance, they need an advocate, financial support. How would you say this could be arranged in a better way? Are there dependencies? How can we, if yes, how can we overcome these dependencies?
So what I see now, so we have this project of NeemaReha, which is supported from Germany. And of course, there is a dependency. So this project depends on the funds from Germany. And but for further development, I would like to overcome this dependency, but I don't know how. And it is also in Germany, it is that people with disabilities always depend on caretakers, depend on financial support. Last time I described the spiral of poverty and disability. So this danger, I think, will remain. But so people with disability need solidarity. And this solidarity can be lived within a country, but there also can be an international solidarity. And I think if we think about the history of slavery and so on, so it could be now a new way of solidarity to give something back, also in the support for people with disabilities. Do you agree, Boaz?
Do you agree? Is this a new kind of solidarity, or is it rather a kind of colonial continuity?
I find it very critical to be in a position where I have to say, yes, I agree, or no, I don't.
Then let me rephrase the question. How can a partnership without dependencies look like?
I think a partnership without dependencies is a very interesting one, because still, again, we want to look at the former times. You might think, okay, why is this person always thinking about the past and not the future and not the now? Because we cannot look at the future, we cannot build a future without learning from the past, without accepting the past, without taking responsibility for whatever that happened in the past, and reflecting on how do we change the discourse, you know, and the narrative. And for me, such partnerships can only happen if I remember in your presentation, Hans, I think you mentioned, or even when we were discussing with Martin, we found out that in the planning, monitoring, and evaluation, usually it's the partner that plans for the funds or for the project to be supported. You know, the partner plans and then the project is supported. But I would like to say that this is one step ahead before even the planning happens, because in most cases, we have those funding calls, right? Who calls for money? Who gives the conditions or Voraussetzungen for this fund? And then the partner can only plan based on these calls that the donor has set. So you see that there is already power structures, because the donor or the one who gives the money sets the conditions. Under which way shall we fund you? What do you have to fulfill? And for me, as Elizabeth also mentioned, that in the last discussion that we had, or in your presentation, Hans, that many people on the continent, or many Tanzanians, as you mentioned, Elizabeth, if I can, use your statement, usually just say yes to everything you say. Why do you think that is the case? And we are not just talking about people who are on the receiving end or the beneficiaries, but we also want to recognize that the partners are severally found in this position. Why? Because they would like to maintain a partnership that sustains their projects. So it is actually a huge discussion on how equal and high level partnerships can be built to avoid dependencies. But maybe one example I can give to you, Hans, I believe this should be your project. I was at the African Music Festival, I think 3 years ago, and I met Lena there. She is a former volunteer, I think, in the NEMA project in Tanzania. And I bought there this bag for my passport, which was supposed to be for my phone, but I thought, I can use it for my passport. And she mentioned that these were made by the project, which I've seen in your presentation. And for me, also, it brings about how do we deconstruct the power relations that are happening between partners. This, for me, can only work if you, for a certain period of time as a northern partner, empower and support the partner in the South or in Tanzania, that in the next 5 years, we would love to support you in this proposed project that you gave us, but then we will get out. You have to devise ways of continuity. That is the only way you will avoid dependency, and that is the only way that you will empower the partner to remain with the high self-esteem that even when you provide them an equal level to discuss things, they will not be in the position of yes, sir, because this yes, sir became also from the colonial times where we had to always say yes, sir, or yes, master.
Hans, we heard a lot about power relations, sustainability, which I know is also a very important point for you in your project work, but also the dependencies. How does it sound for you to kind of what I heard from Boaz is kind of let the people speak for themselves and hear their voices? Do you think from your experiences and your background, is this possible or rather a utopia?
So I think it will take a lot of time. So I was the one to ask this question about the crutches of Esther, which are too long. So you see, even in these simple examples, it needs some professional knowledge, how to deal with it. So how to use the crutches, although it seems very simple, but yeah, it isn't. And so there is a lack of knowledge in many levels. And to increase this knowledge, it will take a lot of time. And also, this will need the input from outside, because this doesn't come from inside. But it is also the reason so why I think I have a lot of ideas what could be done. But still our project is very small. And I think it's good that it is small because it has to grow gradually. And so with the people, the local people, that's the way how it has to go. And it is not me to put all my input there, but only if I will be asked. That's hard for me sometimes.
Good point. You pointed out that it's still a small project. You're working in the NEMA project, and this makes maybe also communication easier, and there are stronger boundary, like you're bounded together. And I think your project already did a lot of positive development and impact. I mean, Boaz even heard about your project before you met. If you look back, I mean, you're now in Germany and your time in Tanzania is already more than a year ago, and you look at your project, is there anything you see critical or something you would do different in future? Or would you say, no, we already had kind of an inclusive way and I think this is the way forward?
I'm not sure if I have done many mistakes, but I didn't know many things. So, and even now, yeah, I know things which I didn't know 4 years ago, but also in future there will be things which I will know, which I don't know right now. So it has to develop, and yes. So, but living with people with disabilities also means accepting limits. No? So that's what we are not used to. No? So to accept limits. No? So we can't do everything. No? So to change what can be changed and to accept what you cannot change. And sometimes this we have to learn from Tanzanian people. That's their strengths. So to accept things how they are instead of changing them. So I have an interesting example. So I used to go to the office where the accountant of the diocese was sitting. And he was sitting on an office chair, you know, these office chairs with a 5 feet. And so the one foot of this chair was broken. So, and he always was swinging so with his chair. And immediately I was thinking, what can you do? Put something beneath or to solve this problem. But then I detected myself, I was solving a problem which he didn't have. So he didn't suffer from this problem, but I was already starting to solve the problem. So there is a different way of thinking. So therefore, so to accept things how they are, that is also when we think about the project, how is it going? So it is not perfect. So then we have to accept that as well.
Very interesting what you're saying, Hans. Like, you're a German going to Tanzania, coming back and saying, okay, what we as Germans have to learn is also to accept things we can't change, and we're sometimes solving problems which are actually not there for the people. Boaz, I have another question as we come now to a kind of more personal level. I think what Hans experienced in Tanzania, you probably have same or other experiences in Germany. Like, you as a Black person with impairments living in Berlin, I assume you already experienced discrimination yourself. But how do you think that marginalized groups within Germany can be heard better? Or what is your experiences in your living situation here in Germany?
Well, my experience are very intersectional. They intersect with each other. And again, that would be like a long discussion, but I get highly surprised when I see how and what I expected when I was in Uganda or when I was in Tanzania or in Zim. What I thought about Europe was, you know, heaven in relation to living with a disability and what have you. And I don't want to talk about my discrimination experiences about my color as a Black man, but as a person who uses crutches or someone who uses a wheelchair. We must realize that in a structural sense, Germany as a country is not accessible at all. And when we talk about accessibility, we don't want to just talk about elevators, or we don't want to talk about streets which have those possibilities that one can get over the pedestrian path. But we also want to talk about information, accessibility of information. We want to talk about if I go to the website of Tanzania Network and I am visually impaired, can I access it? Can I know what you're doing? We want to talk about the institutional inaccessibility of information on what are my rights as a person with a disability. We want also to talk about employment and equality or equity, actually, in relation to living with a disability. In Germany, when you look at all those Behindertenwerkstätten or workshops for persons with disabilities, they work. Just depending on their capacities, they do a job. They deliver a job, whichever way they do, but look at their remunerations. How are they paid? Realizing that for them to do this job, they incur high costs of making everything work so that they can be at this job almost every single day. But also look at the taxes that they pay, because they bring something to the country, to building the country. But then when you look at how much they get on their paycheck, it's very little as compared to what you pay. So where is the equity? I really want to just put myself out of the picture as Boaz, you know, because if I individualize myself in this discussion, it doesn't make a huge sense. But in practice, for me, look, comparing Germany and East Africa or Tanzania, I think that Germany itself has a lot of work to do in regard to people with disabilities than just focusing on the outside. You know, my simple thinking is, hey, how about if you just stop washing the cup on the outside and think about the inside of the cup? Just clean on the inside and then go outside, so that we can, or you come from a clean place. And this is for me something that I would say about that, just going away from my personal individual experience.
If we take it away from your personal experiences, and you already pointed out there's a lot to do in Germany, a lot to do, we all have to work on. But do you then think that debates like this actually are useful, especially useful for people living in Uganda or Tanzania? Or is this debate as a whole already a privileged one?
I think for me, it's a place of, and again, Hans, as I shared with you, even today, looking at your presentation, I was super happy also to read that your project, which I gladly supported buying that little bag for my passport, for me was from a place to realize, wow, someone is doing something. You know, this is very good. And I didn't support this project because I knew you as a white person behind the project, but because Lina, as a young volunteer who was in Tanzania, told me these bags, these pieces of art are made by Tanzanian persons with impairments, women with impairments. And I was like, look here, instead of me sending my own €2 every single month as a Mitgliederbeitrag in your Förderverein or in your supporting association, how about if I just buy this, you know, and my behavior is just don't buy it €10 that they're selling it, but buy it at least a little bit more. And talking about privileges, you know, you don't want to forget that why we landed in the discussion of development and aid is also historic, and it is also about how do I want to feel and how do I want people to see me as Germany, you know? And that's why you see many developed countries, they fight to donate monies which are higher than the others because they want to be told, you know, this country was giving more than the other. Why? It's an issue of conscience, it's an issue of being seen as important, but also to reproduce the dependencies of the people down in the south. And so having this discussion for me in Uganda would be very important, but if it is focusing on what are the possibilities that the Ugandans, the Tanzanians, the Africans can check in for themselves, can look in the countries where they are, in the communities where they are, to create changes that they need. And if they need help, then they reach out. They say, hey, for example, again, I will have to say this. I've seen Katarina Davis, who is from the TMO. She was speaking earlier, introducing the topic. And I see structures that you're working with hands, for example, with the diocese. The diocese is a huge structure in Tanzania, or the church is a huge structure in Tanzania, whether or not everyone is a Christian or a member of that church, but it's a huge structure that you can use, that the local people in Tanzania can use to raise the 2 million that you're using to invest in the project. €2 million is not a huge amount of money for Tanzanians to raise for themselves using the existing structure that they have. The only question is, have you empowered them to do that? Or you've given him the mindset of a certain helper, a savior from somewhere in Europe is going to come and save you all your problems.
Okay, Boaz, I feel you're now getting in the flow. Thank you very much for sharing your perspective and coming from the debate about privileges to how can we have a debate on the local ground with local people, seeing which changes we need there. Before I wrap up this conversation, I would like to give you both the chance in a last very brief statement to say what you want us to remember from this discussion or also from the whole workshops on inclusion. Something that really should stick in our minds. Hans, maybe you want to start when Boaz is trying to reconnect.
I will repeat what I several times already said. So rehabilitation is teamwork. And so what does it mean? So it means, first of all, it needs work. So we really have to work to give a personal input into this partnership, into the help, and also, yeah, it will cost something. No? So it will cost also personal efforts. It will cost money or whatever. But on the other hand, it will come back. No? So it is worth not to also to invest this work. And team means also, yeah, you are not alone in the world. No? So we live together with others. So we as human beings, we are social persons. No? So we depend on one another. And so this we don't have to get, and one is not better than the other. No? So this moral criteria so don't fit. No? So we need collaboration, and in this light we can see also with others. So we have to be aware that we ourselves cannot do everything. So we depend really on others. And this is so my really belief. We rehabilitation also and working with people with disabilities needs teamwork.
Okay, we remember Hans, teamwork. Boaz, can you briefly say what we should remember about inclusion?
Thank you. Again, I will relate to what Hans just said, and from a completely African perspective, Bantu, the organization that I'm working with other colleagues, was not built just on the foundations of, yes, we want to help, but rather is being built on the foundation and on the pillars of community and relying on each other's support, like you just said. Also reflecting on the fact that we are purely shielding ourselves with a philosophy of Ubuntu. Ubuntu is not, it's just reminding us every time that we depend on each other, and without each other we cannot exist. We exist because we all exist. So this is something that I would like to just add on to what you said, Hans, but also I would like to mention that while we depend on each other and we want to strive for inclusion, for me, this is very important to notice that you cannot depend on the other who you have not given the opportunity to give what they would love to give. If you've not given me the chance to give what I can give, but still see me like, okay, you are like this, so you cannot give or you cannot support, is purely not something that can foster equal and flat cooperations or collaborations or interdependency and not dependency in this sense. So it's a question that I would like you not to just go remembering about this discussion, but go back and ask yourselves, if there are people from Tanzania in this place, I very much would like to ask you, as you go right now, ask yourself, do you really need people from Europe? Do you really need them to answer or to solve all your problems? Or you actually want to think about how can we find solutions for ourselves before we are put in the in the limelight of dependency?
All right. So I remember Hans' teamwork, and Boaz is also thinking about our own behavior and what we can do. Thank you both very much. It has been a very interesting and exciting debate, and I'm very happy that you both volunteered to be here with us today. Thank you very much.